I always thought losing my parents would be the hardest part of my life. I didn't realize that grief could be sharpened into humiliation until the day their will was read. That day wasn't just about property or assets. It was about judgment. It was about who mattered and who didn't in the eyes of my family. The lawyer's office felt too polished for the storm brewing inside me. Thick carpets muffled my footsteps as I entered, while mahogany shelves, lined with books, made the room feel like a courtroom ready to pass sentence. My younger brother, Caleb, leaned against the wall in his tailored suit, grinning as if this was already another one of his victories. I could see it in his eyes. He believed the outcome was decided before I even walked through the door. The lawyer cleared his throat and began. My parents' estate was sizable, though not the fortune of legends. Yet the distribution told the entire story of where their loyalties rested. Caleb, the golden child, was handed the crown jewel, a mansion in New York worth over $800,000, along with the majority of financial assets. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Then came my name. I wasn't given stocks. I wasn't given land in the city. I wasn't even given a decent house. No. My parents left me a rotting wooden cabin in the frozen wilderness of Alaska, a forgotten structure far removed from civilization, a place that sounded more like punishment than inheritance. Caleb smirked across the table, his lips curling with the satisfaction of a man who had just confirmed his superiority. "Guess Dad always knew I'd be the one to carry the Hale name," he said, patting me on the shoulder as though I were a child who needed comforting after losing a game. Every word felt like salt on an open wound. I sat frozen in my chair, gripping the armrests as if holding on would keep me from collapsing. My face burned with shame. The lawyer droned on, but I barely heard him. In that moment I wasn't just a man who had lost his parents. I was the afterthought, the forgotten son, the leftover. When I left the office, Caleb's laughter followed me into the cold New York air. I walked the streets with the deed to that cabin clutched in my hand, the paper mocking me with every step. People hurried past, unaware that my entire life had just been reduced to a cruel joke. The humiliation deepened when I returned home and told Rachel, my fiancée, what had happened. She didn't soften. She didn't comfort me. Instead, her eyes blazed with fury and her voice rose until the neighbors could hear. "A cabin? Are you kidding me? Caleb gets a mansion, and you get a shack in the woods. Do you even hear yourself when you talk about your life? You are a pathetic loser, Ethan. You always have been." She threw the engagement ring on the table, the metal clinking louder than any shout. Then she slammed the door, leaving me alone in silence. In 1 week I had lost my parents and the woman I thought would stand by me for life. I sat there staring at the ring, every insult from my childhood echoing in my head. My father's cold words, Caleb's smugness, Rachel's venom. Together they formed a chorus that told me I was worthless. That night I unfolded the deed again. The cabin in Alaska stared back at me in faded ink, and I realized I had nothing left to lose. The mansion was Caleb's. The life I thought I was building with Rachel was gone. All I had was that cabin, and whether it was a curse or a chance, it was the only thing left with my name on it. The night Rachel walked out, the silence in my apartment was suffocating. The walls that once echoed with laughter now pressed against me like a prison. I stared at the engagement ring glinting under the dim light, its sparkle mocking me with the life I thought I had built. That ring wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was the symbol of every dream I had shared with her. And now it sat abandoned, cold and fine. Rachel had been with me for 3 years. She had seen me struggle, stumble, and claw my way through jobs that barely paid the bills. In the beginning she called it charm. She said she admired that I was different from the shallow men who measured themselves by money and status. But somewhere along the way that admiration twisted into contempt. She stopped seeing my resilience as strength. She started seeing it as failure. I replayed her words over and over. "You're a pathetic loser, Ethan. You always have." The venom in her voice was sharper than any insult Caleb had ever thrown at me. She didn't just leave me, she stripped me down to nothing. It wasn't just rejection. It was annihilation. The worst part was that she had waited until I was at my weakest. She knew my parents were gone. She knew I was still raw from grief. And she chose that moment to drive the knife deeper. The timing wasn't coincidence, it was cruelty. For days I carried the echo of that slammed door everywhere I went. Every time I picked up the deed to the cabin, I heard her voice sneering at me. Every time I caught my reflection in a window, I saw the man she had described small, pitiful, worthless. But humiliation wasn't the only wound she left me. There was also betrayal. Rachel had never truly loved. She had loved the idea of me catching up to Caleb, of someday stepping into his shadow and reaping the benefits. She wanted the mansion lifestyle without the man who had earned it. When the will exposed the truth that I wasn't the golden child, she decided I wasn't worth the wait. One evening, I sat in our empty apartment staring at the closet she once filled with dresses and heels. The scent of her perfume still lingered on the fabric of my couch. I thought about the dinners we shared, the late-night promises, the whispered plans of a future that would never come. All of it felt like a carefully crafted lie. I wanted to hate her, but a part of me hated myself more. I had believed her when she said she loved me for who I was. I had clung to those words as proof that maybe I wasn't as invisible as my family made me feel. Losing her wasn't just about love, it was about validation. And when she walked out, she took that validation with her, leaving me hollow. Still, as much as it hurt, there was clarity in her cruelty. Rachel had revealed herself for what she truly was. Someone who valued wealth over loyalty, image over love. She wasn't walking away from me because I had failed. She was walking away because I no longer fit the fantasy she wanted to live. That night I made a decision. If Rachel could leave me at my lowest, then she had no right to share in whatever I built from the ashes. The ring she had abandoned became my reminder. Not of her love, but of the lesson she taught me. The people who only stay when life looks perfect aren't worth keeping. Growing up in the Hale family meant living in a house with 2 sons, but only one ever felt like he truly belonged. Caleb was the chosen one, the shining star who drew attention without even trying. I was the other son, the one who learned early that some lights shine so brightly they leave others in darkness. Our father, Arthur, believed life was a battlefield. He wanted a son who could conquer, lead, and dominate. To him, Caleb embodied that image perfectly. Caleb played varsity soccer, and my father was there at every game, shouting from the sidelines with pride as if he had raised a world champion. When Caleb scored, Dad's cheers shook the bleachers. When Caleb missed, Dad's voice boomed louder, encouraging him to fight harder. I remember the day I brought home a short story I had written. My teacher had said it was exceptional, that it showed promise. I placed it on the dinner table that night, waiting for recognition. My mother gave me a soft smile, but my father barely glanced at the paper. Instead, he turned to Caleb and asked about his goals for the next soccer season. That moment burned into my memory. The silence around my work felt heavier than any criticism. It wasn't just sports. Caleb always had the newest things. If he wanted a car, somehow one appeared. If I asked for something, the response was usually the same. Not practical, not necessary, work harder. My wants were treated as burdens. His were treated as destiny. As we grew older, the divide only widened. Caleb moved into the world with ease, landing a job as a financial consultant in New York. He dressed in tailored suits, drove sleek cars, and took weekend trips to Europe. His life sparkled like a display case, filled with things people admired. Whenever he entered a room, people leaned toward him. They wanted to be close to his charm. Meanwhile, I worked jobs that barely covered rent. Long hours, small paychecks, and little recognition. I tried to build a life of my own, but every step I took felt like trudging uphill while Caleb rode elevators to the top. I wanted to be proud of him. I wanted to ignore the comparison, but the truth was inescapable. No matter how hard I tried, I was always measured against him, and I always came up short. Even Rachel, the woman I thought would see me differently, eventually fell into the same trap. She began comparing me to Caleb. His suits, his drive, his ambition. "Why can't you be more like him?" she'd ask, as though copying my brother was the answer to all of life's problems. Her words echoed what I had heard my whole life. Caleb was the standard. I was the disappointment. The weight of living in his shadow wasn't just about material things, it was about identity. Caleb was the son who carried the family name with pride. I was the son my father thought needed to toughen up. The son who was never quite enough. My mother's kindness softened the edges, but she never challenged my father's choices. Her silence, though gentle, still cut. I grew into adulthood carrying that invisible label, lesser. Every time Caleb smiled, every time people praised him, I felt the gap widen. It wasn't jealousy, it was erasure. I was the background character in my own family story, and Caleb was the star. And when the will was read, when he received the mansion and I received the cabin, it wasn't just about property. It was the final stamp on years of imbalance. It was proof that the shadow wasn't just in my head. It was real, cast long and deep by the golden boy who never knew what it felt like to be second best. When the plane touched down in Alaska, the world outside looked like another planet. Snow stretched as far as the eye could see, broken only by dark forests and jagged mountains. The air was sharper, colder, biting into my lungs with every breath. I clutched the deed in my pocket like it was both a curse and a lifeline. The small airline had arranged for a driver, a man with a weathered face who barely spoke as he loaded my single bag into the back of his battered truck. We drove for hours through silence, the tires crunching over icy roads. Frozen rivers gleamed under the pale sun, and abandoned houses flashed past the window like ghosts of forgotten lives. Finally, at the end of a narrow road, the driver stopped. He pointed ahead and said, "That's as far as I go, cabin should be a mile that way." Then he left me standing alone, snow crunching under my boots, the wilderness swallowing me whole. The walk to the cabin felt longer than it was. The trees loomed high, their branches heavy with ice, and the silence pressed against my ears. No traffic, no city noise, just my breath and the steady thud of my boots in the snow. With every step, Rachel's words followed me. Pathetic loser. They cut through the quiet louder than any sound. When I finally saw the cabin, my heart sank. It was worse than I imagined. The porch sagged like it wanted to collapse under its own weight. One of the windows was shattered, a jagged hole letting the cold pour inside. The wood on the exterior was blackened and cracked, rotting from years of neglect. The roof dipped dangerously, as though one strong storm could bring it down entirely. I let out a short, bitter laugh. This was no inheritance. It was mockery carved in wood and nailed together with rust. I dropped my bag on the porch, the boards groaning under the weight, and pushed open the door. The hinges screamed, the sound echoing like the place itself was angry at being disturbed. Inside, the air was thick with dust and mold. Broken furniture littered the floor, chairs snapped in half. A table slanted against one wall. The kitchen sink had rusted through, and the floorboards creaked like they were begging me not to step too hard. The smell was sour, old wood, and rot blending into something foul. I walked from room to room, my footsteps cautious. Each space told the same story. Abandonment. Torn curtains dangled like shredded rags. Mice had chewed through what once might have been a couch. A cracked mirror leaned against a wall, reflecting back a man who looked as broken as the house itself. I sank into the least broken chair I could find, and buried my face in my hands. "This is what they thought of me," I whispered into the empty room. My voice echoed back, hollow. "This is all I'm worth." The weight of it crushed me. My parents hadn't left me a challenge. They had left me a ruin. Caleb had his mansion in the city, a symbol of prestige and success. I had a shack in the wilderness, a monument to failure. The difference wasn't just in property, it was in meaning. One son was given the crown, the other was handed the scraps. As the daylight faded, the cold crept in. I unrolled my sleeping bag in the corner of the least broken room. Every creak of the floor, every whistle of wind through the broken window, reminded me how fragile the cabin was, how fragile I was. Lying there in the dark, listening to the wind rattle the walls, I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life by coming here. The next morning, Pale light filtered through the broken window, casting thin beams across the ruined floor. My body ached from sleeping on hard boards, and the cold gnawed at me even though I had kept the fire burning for hours. I forced myself up, telling myself that if I had nothing else, at least I had time. Time to look deeper, to see if this place had anything more than rot and broken dreams. I started moving debris, shoving aside splintered chairs and sweeping piles of dust into the corners. Anger gave me strength. Every sweep of the broom felt like I was striking back at Caleb's smug smile. Every shove of broken wood reminded me of Rachel's venomous words. I couldn't go back to them empty-handed. If this cabin was the last thing tying me to my family, then I needed to understand why. Hours passed, and the rooms slowly cleared. The fireplace was still functional with some repair. The beams in the ceiling looked sturdier than I expected, but the place was far from livable. Just when I thought I had seen it all, I dragged a dusty rug away from the floor of the main room. That's when I noticed it. A small iron ring embedded in a wooden panel. I froze. The panel didn't match the rest of the floor. Its edges were cut too straight, its surface slightly raised as if it was meant to be found or meant to be hidden. My pulse quickened as I crouched down and wrapped my fingers around the ring. The cold iron bit into my skin. I pulled, and the panel lifted with a groan of rusted hinges, revealing a black void beneath the cabin. A hidden cellar. The smell rose first, damp, earthy, like soil sealed away for decades. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. Wooden steps descended into the unknown, worn but intact. My stomach tightened, and for a moment I hesitated. What if this was nothing but an old storm shelter? What if it was worse, rotting beams that would collapse under me? But curiosity shoved fear aside. I lowered one foot onto the first step. It groaned but held. Slowly I descended, each step echoing in the cramped silence. The air grew colder as I went down, my breath fogging in the beam of light. At the bottom, the flashlight swept across stone walls lined with wooden crates. Metal chests sat stacked in the corners, some rusted, some surprisingly solid. A large trunk rested against the far wall, its brass fittings dulled with age. Dust blanketed everything, but the arrangement was deliberate. This wasn't random storage. Someone had hidden these things with intention. My heart pounded. I crouched before the nearest crate, prying the lid until the wood splintered. Inside, neat bundles wrapped in cloth were stacked like bricks. I picked one up, untied the twine, and nearly dropped it. In my hands lay a stack of gold coins, heavy and gleaming even through decades of dust. I staggered back, the flashlight trembling in my grip. I tore open another bundle. Antique jewelry sparkled back at me. Rings, brooches, necklaces studded with stones I couldn't even name. My pulse thundered in my ears. This wasn't junk. This was treasure. I turned slowly, shining the light across the cellar again. Crates upon crates, chests upon chests. A fortune hidden beneath a ruin everyone thought was worthless. For the first time since stepping foot in Alaska, I didn't feel despair. I felt something else. Fear, yes, but also awe. My parents hadn't left me garbage. They had left me something colossal, something dangerous, something that could change everything. As the beam of my flashlight swept across the cellar, the full weight of what I had uncovered began to sink in. The crates weren't filled with junk. They were organized, deliberate, and valuable beyond comprehension. I crouched in front of another wooden box, pried it open with shaking hands, and stared at rows of neatly wrapped parcels. I tore one open, and more gold spilled into my lap, coins heavy with history. I whispered into the silence, "What is this?" The sound of my own voice startled me, as though the cabin above might hear and collapse under the weight of this secret. I moved from crate to crate like a man possessed. In one, I found silver bars stacked tightly together, their dull shine still unmistakable. In another, I uncovered strings of pearls, jeweled brooches, and watches whose dials were frozen but whose casings gleamed. Each discovery tightened my chest until it felt like I couldn't breathe. But it wasn't just trinkets. When I pulled open the large trunk in the corner, I found leather-bound ledgers, pages yellowed with age but meticulously kept. They held records of mining claims, land rights, and old business dealings. The handwriting belonged to men who had lived long before me, but the names were familiar. Hale, over and over again, the family name was scrawled across deeds and maps. I sat back on the cold floor, the flashlight balanced on my knee, and tried to process what I was seeing. The numbers, the assets, the claims. It wasn't just a pile of forgotten wealth, it was a legacy. My parents had left Caleb a mansion, but they had left me something hidden, something that stretched back through generations. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. I wasn't sitting on scraps, I was sitting on a fortune, one that could easily exceed $50 million in value. The coins alone gleamed like solid proof, but the documents suggested something even larger. Untapped land rich with resources, mining rights that could still hold value, and timber contracts buried in time. I pressed my hand against the nearest crate, steadying myself. For years I had believed I was worthless. I had listened to Caleb boast about his success, heard my father dismiss me, and endured Rachel's cruel comparison. And now in the cold cellar beneath a rotting shack, I was staring at proof that I had been chosen to carry something greater than all of them. Relief wasn't the only thing that came. Fear crept in just as fast. If Caleb ever discovered this, he would fight tooth and nail to claim it. If Rachel caught wind, she would come crawling back, pretending she had never left. And the world would devour me alive if I announced what I had found. This wasn't just wealth, it was responsibility, it was danger. I closed the trunk carefully, placed the coins back into the crate, and forced myself to steady my breathing. My parents hadn't given me trash. They had entrusted me with power, not the kind you flaunt in public, but the kind you protect with everything you have. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a man abandoned. I felt like a man chosen. Night fell heavy over the cabin as I sat on the floor surrounded by crates and ledgers. My flashlight flickered against the stone walls, making the shadows dim. I had been cataloging what I could, scribbling rough notes in a worn notebook I carried, when I noticed something unusual tucked between the brittle pages of a ledger. It was an envelope, yellowed, folded neatly, and sealed with care. My name was written on the front, not in my father's sharp, commanding handwriting, but in the softer curves of my mother's script. My heart thudded as I traced the letters with my thumb. For a long moment, I just stared. My mother had been gone for months, her absence still raw. To see her handwriting again was like seeing her ghost. I tore the envelope open carefully, the paper fragile in my hands. Inside was a letter. "Ethan," it began, "if you are reading this, it means your father and I are gone. I need you to understand that what we have left for you is not a mistake or a punishment. It is trust." The words blurred for a moment as my eyes burned with tears. I forced myself to keep reading. "Your father always saw Caleb as bold, but he also saw recklessness in him. He saw pride in appearances, not substance. With you he saw strength, strength that does not shout, strength that does not always win applause, but strength that endures. We knew you would protect this legacy, not squander it. Please forgive us for the way it may have seemed. We love you. Your mother." I pressed the letter against my chest, the paper trembling in my grip. Years of silence, years of feeling invisible, years of believing I was unwanted, all of it cracked open in that moment. My mother's voice, hidden in those lines, cut through every cruel word Caleb had ever spoken, and every insult Rachel had ever thrown. For so long I had carried bitterness like a second skin. I thought my parents had never believed in me, that I was the unwanted son. But here in my hands was proof that they had seen me differently all along. They hadn't chosen Caleb for this, they had chosen me. Tears spilled freely as I read the letter again, slower this time. The words didn't erase the years of neglect or the sting of favoritism, but they reframed everything. My father's harshness no longer felt like dismissal. It felt like a test, twisted though it was. My mother's quiet eyes, which had always lingered on me in silence, now spoke volumes through this final message. I whispered into the cold air. "You trusted me. You really trusted me." The cellar no longer felt like a hidden vault. It felt like a message across time, a direct conversation from my parents to me. They hadn't left me a ruin to suffer in. They had left me a fortress to protect, a legacy to carry, and a truth to finally see. That night I didn't sleep much. I sat by the fire upstairs, the letter folded neatly in my lap, the edges warm against my fingers. I thought about Caleb in his mansion, proud and smug, convinced he had been the favored son. I thought about Rachel, who had called me pathetic and thrown my ring back in my face. And for the first time I didn't feel the need to prove anything to them. My parents had already given me the proof I had longed for my entire life. I wasn't the leftover son, I was the chosen one. Humiliated by the will, abandoned by Rachel, and haunted by years of being overlooked, I had carried nothing but bitterness and despair. But after finding the cellar and my mother's letter, something shifted deep inside me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't surviving under someone else's shadow. I was standing in my own light. It started small. I patched the broken window, hammered loose nails back into the walls, and swept out the rot that had collected for years. Each swing of the hammer, each repair I made, wasn't just fixing wood, it was fixing me. Every improvement said, "You're not worthless. You're building something that matters." When I looked at the cabin again, I didn't see a ruin anymore. I saw possibility. The sagging roof became a challenge I could overcome. The moldy walls became a test of patience I was ready to face. The place that once symbolized rejection was transforming into a fortress of determination. Rachel's words still echoed in my head, but they no longer cut me down. They fueled me. Every time I remembered her sneer, "Pathetic loser," I swung harder, worked longer, and refused to collapse. Caleb's smirk haunted me too, but now it didn't mock me. It reminded me why I couldn't fail. His arrogance had always defined him, but I had been entrusted with something he could never handle. Identity isn't built in comfort, it's forged in pressure. As I patched that cabin, I realized I wasn't the weak son, the forgotten fiancé, or the shadow of a golden brother. I was the man chosen to protect a legacy worth far more than money. One night, sitting beside the fire, I unfolded my mother's letter again. Her words weren't just instructions, they were a mirror showing me who I truly was: patient, resilient, strong in ways my family had never acknowledged. Caleb's strength was loud, flashy, and shallow. Mine was quieter, hidden, but unbreakable. That realization became the foundation of my new identity. The bitterness I had carried began to dissolve. For years I had lived seeking approval, hoping for my father's recognition, craving my mother's voice to speak up, and clinging to Rachel's empty validation. But with that letter in my hands, I finally understood. I didn't need anyone else to tell me I was enough. I had been enough all along. The cellar full of treasure was more than wealth. It was a mirror of my own worth, hidden, overlooked, dismissed by those who only cared for appearances, but powerful and undeniable once uncovered. Just like me. For the first time I looked into the cracked mirror in the cabin, and didn't see failure. I saw someone chosen, someone tested, someone ready. Transformation doesn't come in an instant. It comes in choice after choice. And as I repaired that cabin, I made a vow with every nail I drove and every board I replaced. I would protect what my parents entrusted to me, not because I wanted to prove Caleb or Rachel wrong, but because I finally believed in myself. The Ethan who had arrived in Alaska was shattered. The Ethan who stood in that cabin now was something else entirely: rebuilt, sharpened, and unafraid. The news of the will spread quickly among family friends, and before long Caleb started circling. He called one evening, his voice smooth and arrogant, the same tone he had always used when he thought he held all the cards. "So, how's life in your little shack?" he sneered. "Have you realized yet that Mom and Dad left you a pile of garbage while I'm living in their mansion? Sell it and stop embarrassing yourself, Ethan. Everyone knows you can't handle anything better." I gripped the phone tight, fighting the urge to laugh in his face. He had no idea what was beneath the floorboards of that cabin. No clue that the so-called garbage was worth far more than his polished mansion in New York. For a second, I wanted to spit the truth at him, to break his smugness with the weight of reality. But I did. Instead, I kept my voice calm. "I'm managing," I said. It was the first time in years I'd spoken to Caleb without feeling crushed. Let him believe he had won. The truth was mine, and for once, I didn't need his approval. Rachel was next. Weeks after storming out, she sent a message. Her tone was suddenly softer, her words dressed in false regret. "Ethan, I overreacted. I miss you. Maybe we could talk about things again." I stared at the screen, remembering her eyes blazing with contempt, her voice calling me a loser loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I thought about the ring she had slammed on the table, her laughter at the idea of me inheriting nothing but a shack. And now she wanted to talk. No, she didn't miss me. She missed what she thought I had. I deleted the message without a word. But she wasn't finished. Another week passed, and another message came. I don't care about what your parents left. I just want you back. The hypocrisy almost made me laugh. Rachel had never cared about me without condition. She had loved the idea of a man who could rise to Caleb's level, not the man who existed in front of her. Her sudden affection wasn't about me. It was about the whispers she must have heard. Rumors that maybe the cabin wasn't as worthless as it seemed. This time, I didn't even hesitate. I deleted her again. For the first time in my life, I felt strong enough to shut the door without regret. Caleb's arrogance no longer cut me down. Rachel's empty promises no longer tempted me. Both of them represented the life I had carried on my back for years. The life of comparison, humiliation, and constant need for validation. And now, I didn't need any of it. What struck me most was how easy it was to let go once I had finally seen the truth. Caleb could keep his mansion. Rachel could chase her fantasies with someone else. I didn't need to prove myself to them anymore. My parents had already proven it for me when they placed their trust in me instead of him. The freedom in that realization was heavier than gold and brighter than jewels. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to Caleb or Rachel. I was choosing my own path. The night I finished reading my mother's letter for the second time, I sat in front of the fire watching the flames dance against the cracked cabin wall. The cellar full of treasure was real. Gold, jewels, ledgers, and land rights worth more than I could ever have imagined. But the longer I stayed in Alaska, the more I realized the true gift wasn't measured in millions. It was something deeper. For years, I had believed rejection defined me. My father's cold judgment, Caleb's endless shadow, Rachel's cruel words, all of it convinced me I was destined to fail. When I first saw the cabin, I thought it was the final insult, proof that I was nothing more than the family's leftover. But beneath the rotten boards, beneath the ruin everyone dismissed, was proof that I had been trusted with something greater. That was the lesson. Sometimes what looks like rejection is trust in disguise. The mansion Caleb received was a trophy, something for him to flaunt, a symbol he could polish and show to the world. But the cabin was a test. It was hidden, difficult, demanding. It required patience and resilience, qualities Caleb never valued, and Rachel never understood. My parents knew that. They chose me, not because I was louder or more charming, but because I could carry the weight no one else could. The lesson didn't erase the pain of the past, but it reshaped it. My father's silence, my mother's quiet eyes, even Caleb's arrogance, they no longer defined me. They had shaped me into someone who could handle the responsibility I now carried. The boy who once craved approval had become the man who no longer needed it. When I looked at the cabin now, I didn't see a ruin. I saw a beginning. Every repaired wall, every nailed board, every night spent cataloging the cellar became part of a transformation. The cabin had broken me down to my lowest, then forced me to rebuild not only its walls but myself. I thought about Rachel, who would have come running back if she knew the truth. I thought about Caleb, still laughing in his mansion, blind to the legacy he had been denied. And then I thought about my parents, about the decision they made in silence. They hadn't abandoned me. They had trusted me. That truth mattered more than all the wealth hidden below my feet. In the end, the cabin became more than an inheritance. It was a mirror. It showed me the parts of myself I had ignored, the resilience I didn't know I had, the strength I never thought I possessed. It wasn't about proving Caleb wrong or shutting Rachel out. It was about proving to myself that I was never the weak one. I was the one chosen to protect what truly mattered. As the fire burned low, I whispered into the quiet, "I won't waste this. I'll honor it. I'll protect it." The world could call me whatever it wanted. Caleb could keep his pride. Rachel could chase her illusions, and strangers could judge from a distance. But I knew the truth. My parents had left me not a ruin, but a legacy, not a rejection, but a gift. And when I looked back at the man who stepped off the plane into Alaska, broken, humiliated and desperate, I realized he was gone. In his place stood someone rebuilt, someone chosen, someone free.